Cujo? Hi, Cujo. Hey, boy.
So I've got something new today, quite possibly something that absolutely no one wants, but we shall see. It's a significant part of my life, and I wanted to share it with you all. I have been a huge reader since forever. One of my best memories from childhood is doing those library summer reading challenges, just punching off all of the books, reading way too many books. And I admit that unfortunately, in recent years, since becoming more political and starting to make my own videos and commentary, I have kind of let fiction reading especially fall to the wayside. It can kind of feel like there's just always a podcast to listen to. There's always a breaking news story to cover. There's always a video to make. And it can become easy to write off fiction reading, especially as unimportant and just unnecessary. But that has recently changed for me. I'm happy to report. It was my birthday a few weeks ago, and I walked into a Barnes & Noble. I don't know why. It's not a place that I have been in years. But I went into Barnes & Noble and I picked up a lot of Stephen King books. I don't know why. I do like Stephen King. I started reading him in 2018 and I liked what I read. I loved what I read, but again, it fell to the wayside. But in the last 3 weeks, I have read Christine, Cujo, and now I'm reading Salem's Lot. Today, I wanted to talk to you about Cujo. We can call it a book review, but I feel like that sounds a little bit academic. I'm talking about books. Like I said, it can be easy to dismiss fiction novels, but when we're discussing books, when we're reading books, what we're really talking about is being human and what it means to be human and what it means to be alive. Arguably, there's not much more important than that. It's more important than the latest stupid thing that the Democrats have been doing, not to get political. So I want to talk to you today about Cujo. I will not do any spoilers in the beginning of the video, and before I do any spoilers, you will have fair warning. Rest easy. This book is brutal. It is absolutely a punch in the gut. It's unrelenting, which makes sense because I was reading a interview with Stephen King. He said that he wanted this book to feel like a personal assault. He wanted the book to feel like a brick that was heaved through the window at you. I would say he succeeded. It's like a brick being heaved through the window in slow motion and then hitting you in slow motion. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. All of the events or the non-events feeding into each other, and you know what's going to happen. You also know you can't stop it and you can't look away. That's what it feels like. This book is not for the faint of heart at all. But what I discovered with Cujo, which is the same thing that I've discovered with all of the more well-known Stephen King stories, is you open the book thinking you know what you're going to get because you've either seen the movie or you just have heard the story. If I say Cujo to you, even if you've never read a lick of Stephen King and you've never seen the film, you know what I'm talking about because that's how culturally significant a lot of this man's stories are. So you open the book, especially the more famous ones, with these preconceived notions. Oh, it's about an evil car. Oh, it's about an evil dog. It's about so much more than that. It is, his novels are so much deeper than that, which sounds obvious because of course they are. Otherwise, what would be the meat and potatoes of the novel? Just be a dog was evil, tried to kill everyone in the end. You know, that would not be a book that stands the test of time or becomes culturally significant. So, of course, these books are about something more, but I discovered that again with Cujo. It's about more than a rabid, evil dog. Cujo is essentially about two families. The first family is the Trentons. That is Tad Trenton, 4 years old. He is suffering from night terrors. He is hearing and seeing monsters in his closet. And we never really get a direct answer from Stephen King. How much of those monsters in the closet are in Tad's 4-year-old imagination and how much of them are in real life? I'll come back to that later on. And then there are Tad's parents, Vic and Donna. Donna is having trouble adjusting to life in Castle Rock, Maine. Had previously lived in the hustle and bustle of New York City. She's a stay-at-home wife and a mother, and she has been unfaithful to her husband. Vic is having trouble at work. He has a small, relatively new independent ad agency with his friend and business partner. Then they had a PR controversy with their biggest client, a cereal company that used a dye that did not properly assimilate into the human body, and so people are having memorable, horrific bathroom incidents. I will leave it like that. And then we have the second family, which is Cujo's family. And Cujo is owned by Brett, who's 10 years old, and Brett's parents, Joe and Charity. Joe, for his part, is kind of a nasty guy, abusive towards Charity. It's not a main component of the plot, but it's definitely there that at times he gets inappropriately physical with his wife. Charity is a stalwart, steadfast, loyal, solid woman. She's deeply unhappy, worries that Brett is not experiencing any of the finer things in life, that he has a very limited worldview, just kind of living mostly in the middle of nowhere in Castle Rock, working on cars, repairing things, going hunting, hanging out with his dad's friends, that he's not going to ever experience anything more than that. She has a sister who married up in the world, and Charity romanticizes her sister's life. Her sister lives a couple hours away, and she thinks, if I could just get my son to visit my sister and experience this whole other world, I would be doing such a good service to him. But it's convincing her husband, Joe, who's a bit controlling, to allow her to go. So there's some negotiation there. Now, everything I just said makes it sound like this book is not about a rabid dog who is terrorizing and killing people. That's precisely the point. But all of this character development eventually culminates in Donna and 4-year-old Tad being stuck in a broken down car in the middle of nowhere in 100-degree weather, the rabid dog outside who wants to kill them. Nobody knows where they are, and nobody is coming to save them. Interesting, because you can see all of the characters making choices and taking actions or refraining from taking actions that are leading up and feeding into each other to culminate in this disaster of being stuck in this car with a rabid dog outside. Again, like that slow motion train wreck, and you know what all of it is leading to. And if one person had just made a slightly different choice or just said a few words, maybe none of this would have happened. This pit in your stomach, and it has you gripped and on the edge of your seat. This book gets a lot of criticism online, and I don't think it's well deserved at all. I think that much of this criticism comes from the fact that this book, it's hard to read. And I don't mean that it's very long. My copy is less than 400 pages. It's not mentally taxing, but it is emotionally taxing. And so for that reason, I think it's not an enjoyable read for a lot of people. It's certainly not something that you escape from your life with. And I think some people look for a more academic, kind of deeper reason why they don't like something. They've kind of honed in on and scapegoated this now culturally kind of well-known piece of trivia that Stephen King does not remember writing Cujo. He's been very public about that, very open with the fact that he was at the height of a drug and alcohol addiction while he was writing this book. A lot of people know that. Again, it's become a kind of common, well-known piece of Stephen King trivia. I think that a lot of people take that and they don't necessarily enjoy the book, and so they go, oh, well, it must be because he wasn't sober. It must be because it's half-baked. It's not well-formed. It's not well-polished because he was drunk and high while writing it. You're allowed to have your likes and dislikes. Of course, not every book is for every person, but objectively, Stephen King is a good writer. He's a good storyteller, the master of scary stories, and this is a good novel. You don't have to enjoy it. It's not necessarily an enjoyable read, but this is a good novel. And my gosh, nobody could write this drunk or high. The fact that this came out of that is really quite something. I would be interested to see if Stephen King had never admitted that he was in such a bad place while he was writing Cujo. Would it get all of the criticism online that it currently has? I kind of suspect no. In that same vein, I find Stephen King to be such a fascinating figure for a few reasons. Number one, he did struggle with drugs and alcohol well into the late 1980s. I used to be an actress, used to be a writer. There's kind of this like inner debate among artists. Do you need to feed into your darkness? Do you need to feed into your shadow side? Indulge your trauma, your pain, your addictions? If you get healthy, is your art going to suffer? I'm certainly not giving medical advice, and my absolute hope for anyone watching this video would be for them to be as healthy as absolutely possible. Not necessarily causation, but correlation. Stephen King's earlier works, when he was apparently in the throes of drug and alcohol addiction, they're just on another level. They're better, more raw, brutal. He's not afraid to subvert expectations and press boundaries. Seems like he lost that a bit in his newer work. I'm not saying that's because he was high and drunk. A lot of things could have happened. He's also an older guy. He's been very prolific. Maybe there's just a quota of culturally significant, gripping, scary stories that you can write. Maybe Stephen King met his quota a while ago. I don't know. Again, I want for everyone to be as healthy as possible. I just find it interesting that while he was apparently in the throes of his own real life horror story, his work was better. I also just find it so interesting that the mind that gave us these realms of evil, like Christine, The Shining, Cujo, Carrie, that same mind somehow truly believes that Donald Trump is the gravest evil that we could possibly conceive of in the modern era. That is so tragic, and it's truly a testament to the power of TDS. I know I used to suffer from it. I mean, my gosh, the fact that this man has made a living being the king of scary stories, and he still thinks that Donald Trump is the boogeyman that they tell us that he is.
You don't like Stephen King? You trying to throw shade?
His politics ruined it for me.
That's the problem, right?
That's the problem.
His problem is his Twitter feed. His Twitter feed's fucking brutal. It's like, dude, stop.
Right, that's nuts.
These are like the goofiest, low testosterone boomer takes I've ever heard on anything. Like, stop.
It's very true.
But he's such a brilliant writer.
Really quickly on this before I get back to Cujo, I don't think artists should get political. I really think they do a disservice to their art. When you're an artist, you should want the art to be center stage. You want the art to be what captures people's attention and their minds and their hearts and their imagination. But when you start to make it about you and less about the art, and about your outrage, your every little tweet that you send out from the toilet, all of your feelings and opinions, now you've made it about you and not about the art. You've also robbed yourself of some of the mystique that an artist kind of needs to have. So I think he's done a disservice in his later years. But back to Cujo. This book is an interesting kind of surreal blend of the real and the imaginary. A real fear and imaginary fear. The most horrific parts of this book could actually happen in real life. And of course, that's absolutely terrifying. But there's also this like dark, deep underpinning that Stephen King kind of teases us with and never really answers. What if monsters are real, but they don't come in the form of vampires or werewolves? Instead, they come in the form of a malevolent force that is out to get you, to make you suffer, to orchestrate your ultimate demise. What if it's not just things going wrong in your life? What if it is something making everything go wrong in your life because it wants to get you? Now, it's realistic pain, it's realistic anguish, it's realistic horror, but there's this like hint of the supernatural. Is the supernatural animating this? Is the supernatural really in Tad's closet? We don't necessarily know. Is the supernatural the reason why Cujo is bitten by a bat and becomes rabid? We don't really know. The book opens with this, quote, "Once upon a time, a monster came to the town of Castle Rock. He was not a werewolf, a vampire, a ghoul, or an unnameable creature from the enchanted forest or the snowy wastes. He was only a cop named Frank Dodd with mental and sexual problems." I'm not familiar with the Dead Zone, but apparently Frank Dodd is from the Dead Zone, but he doesn't really feature in this story. We don't really understand why you're bringing up this dead cop, what he has to do with all this. There's a quote that I read in Salem's Lot that I think applies to what I'm saying here, which is, "The idea that the evil that men do lives after them is most unsettling." And I think that applies to Cujo, because in Cujo, King is, again, teasing us with this idea that evil doesn't die with the act, evil doesn't die with the man. Instead, as in the case of Frank Dodd, maybe it lives on, and it lives in your closet, and it's coming after you. It's orchestrating all these events or non-events to create, again, this slow motion train wreck and make a wreck out of your life. Cujo has gotten a lot of criticism for what seems to a lot of readers to be this like unnecessary supernatural bent. I completely disagree with that criticism. I think it makes it all the more. It adds like another layer of terror, because yeah, it's already terrifying because of the just the action of this book and the fact that it could happen in real life. But then there's this extra terrifying element of, what if it's not just bad stuff in life that happens to you? What if it's actually being orchestrated by a malevolent force or a spirit that is out to get you? So I disagree with that criticism that the supernatural wasn't necessary, because again, without it, it wouldn't really have the level of terror that it has, in my view. Another really interesting thing about Cujo is that, for better or worse, human beings, we're kind of okay with hearing about or watching on the screen as human beings suffer, as human characters suffer or even perish. But boy, we do not like it when animals suffer or animal characters perish, especially dogs. But Cujo, again, kind of subverts expectations because you do find yourself just wishing that this dang dog would die already. But there's an even bigger part of you that's like rooting against yourself because you don't actually want Cujo to die. You just want someone to come along and save him. Cujo, this evil dog, is actually just as much a victim as anybody else in the book, probably even more so. He just wants to be a good dog. And he has no idea what is happening. And there are points where Stephen King goes into the third person limited narration point of view, focusing on Cujo. He gives the reader that added insight into Cujo's inner world. Even just saying it, that could come off super cheesy and super bad, but King does it masterfully. And all it does is just heighten up to a level 15 the empathy that we already feel for this big, lovable Saint Bernard who does not know what the heck is going on and just wants to be a good dog. But he's also so evil. He's acting so evil. So you're torn in all of this and you're rooting for the dog to die, which never happens, but you're also feeling so bad for the dog. It's really, really well done. Another criticism that the book gets is that we never really get payoff, so to speak, with these subplots that I mentioned, with Vic's trouble at work, Donna's infidelity, Charity's sister and the visit there. We don't get closure in any of those subplots, so a lot of people are like, why include them? What's the point? There's a couple points. Number one, without the subplots, we wouldn't really know where we are in the world. We wouldn't know how Donna came to be stuck in the car with Tad in 100-degree weather. No one knows where they are, and there's a rabid dog outside. And more importantly, nor would we care. We wouldn't care that this was happening to this mother and her son if we didn't have all of these subplots and character development beforehand. I was watching a short documentary on the making of the film Cujo. It was interesting because they had this version of the film and they showed it to test audiences. And what they found was that in the first half of the film, the audience was not that interested. And then in the second half of the film, the audience was pretty riveted. Which makes sense because the second half is where all the action is. Understandably, the studio thought, well, let's cut as much as possible from that first part so that we can get to the more compelling action as soon as possible. But when they did that, and then they showed the pared down, shorter, edited version of the film to audiences, what they found was that audiences were still not really interested in the first part, but they were even less interested in the second part than they had been with the longer version. What that tells me, and what it ended up ultimately telling the studio, was that you need that exposition, you need that character development, you need those unnecessary subplots in order to actually be invested in this story and to actually care. It's what makes the book more than the sum of its parts, more than just about an evil dog. It's what makes us care. It's what makes the book a punch in the gut. It's what terrifies us, what moves us. I really think that Stephen King did a wonderful job here. Now we're going to get into some spoilers. I think that one of the themes of this book is that monsters are real and they're not in the form of vampires or mummies, and that your parents cannot save you, which is pretty terrifying. And it's something that we all have to come to terms with at some point, that our parents are not heroes and they cannot save us from the monsters of living. And then on the flip side, probably just as terrifying, you cannot save your children as a mother, as a father. Donna does absolutely everything she possibly can to save her son. And at the end, when she thinks she's done it and she thinks she's defeated the monster, she comes to find out that her son is dead. 4-year-old Tad is dead, and he's been dead for a minute and she didn't realize it. And it's absolutely devastating. I mean, you can just feel everything about this unspeakable anguish and grief, and how she tried so hard and she thought she got there and then it was ripped away at the last second. And she can't save her son. She can't save her son from the real life monsters outside of the closet. Another even more devastating aspect of it, if anything could possibly be more devastating than that, and Stephen King doesn't say this explicitly, but Donna will eventually realize it as she lives the rest of her life without her son. Donna gave up everything to save her son. She did absolutely everything. But on the flip side, she also kind of killed him. If she had been faithful to her husband and faithful to her marriage, none of this would have happened. Again, Stephen King doesn't come right out and say it, but Tad would probably be alive if Donna had been faithful to her husband. If she had been faithful to her husband and her husband hadn't found out about the affair, her husband wouldn't have left on his work trip in kind of a huff, and he would have gotten the car fixed. So then Donna and Tad wouldn't have had to go get the car fixed and then get stuck with Cujo outside being rabid. But then there's also this other thing that happens, which is her ex-lover, who she's dumped, comes into the house and ransacks everything, and he erases the note that Donna left saying that she and Tad were going to get the car fixed. And had that note not been erased, the cops and the husband Vic would have known where to find Donna and Tad so much sooner, and those hours, those minutes would have made all the difference. So again, this is not explicitly said. Stephen King is not like preaching to us, but it is very real that none of this would have happened, or at least maybe Tad would have survived if it had happened, if Donna had been faithful to her husband. What a devastating, devastating, devastating thing. In the film, for whatever it's worth, Tad survives, which I think is absolutely necessary in the film. Film audiences are different than book audiences. I think a film audience would have revolted if Tad had died on screen. But for the book, I really think that this is the more impactful and the more powerful ending. But for whatever it's worth, Stephen King apparently told his biographer that if he could go back and rewrite one book, it would be Cujo, because he felt that it took too dark of a turn with having Tad die, and he very much wanted for Tad to live in the movie. Take from that what you will. I think Stephen King did the right thing in this book. I think this book is pretty much perfect exactly as it is. I feel silly saying this after all of that. It sounds like we've just gone through a flogging. But I would absolutely recommend Cujo. It's very, very, very heavy, but it's well worth it. It will be on the edge of your seat. You will feel all of the feelings, and it does remind you of the fragility of life, of how precious life is. And that's another thing I wanted to say about the subplots that people criticize so much because we don't get the payoff. Again, King doesn't explicitly say this. He's not like preaching or hitting us over the head like a hammer. But the subplots kind of serve to remind us that at the end of the day, our problems don't really matter, because we're going along with these subplots, we're getting to know these characters, we're caring about them, they're dealing with infidelity, dealing with professional issues, worrying about whether to stay with their spouse or go. These are real problems. And yet, when the ish hits the fan, when you're in a life or death situation, or your loved ones are, none of that matters. And so I kind of feel like this lack of closure that we get from these subplots serves to remind us that that's how life is. You're going along with your life. You have these huge epic problems that seem huge and epic, and in some way they are huge and epic, but not when you're in a life or death situation. And at the end of the day, no matter what you think about Stephen King, and I certainly have my criticisms, as I've already said, it is absolutely a skill to be able to just put pen to paper, get on a computer and just put words on a page and have them grip audiences, terrify audiences, have them be almost cult classics and just live throughout generations, to the point where, again, I could say Cujo, and even if you've never read Stephen King or seen the film, you know that I'm talking about an evil dog. That is a skill. We could get on the internet and see all sorts of horrible things, and the fact that we can open a Stephen King novel and be terrified, moved, on the edge of our seat and be gripped, that's a skill. I don't care what you say, that is absolutely a skill. So I do recommend reading Cujo. I also realized in doing a little research for this video that I would love, love, love to see Stephen King on the Joe Rogan Experience. It'll never happen for multiple reasons, but apparently Joe Rogan is a pretty big Stephen King fan.
He's an amazing writer. He's one of my personal favorites. I mean, I probably read more Stephen King books than any other fiction author.
And he used to listen to a lot of his older books on the train, on the way to places. And I just think Stephen King on the Joe Rogan Experience, for multiple reasons, would be absolutely a smash hit. I pray that we get that. But you know what? Go ahead and pick up Cujo in the meantime. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you have made it this far, please leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know if you absolutely hated this. I may never do it again. I hope it was a nice little break from politics for you at the end of the day. Like I said, I think that fiction reading novels is about diving into what it means to be human, and I think that's arguably more important than any of the political hits of the day. But let me know what you think, and please do subscribe to the channel. It really helps me in the algorithm, and it helps me keep going. And I will see you again soon with our regularly scheduled political programming. Thank you so much.
There's something about his early stuff when he was off the rails. Like he said, he doesn't even remember writing Cujo. Doesn't even remember it.
It's my favorite book of his.
It's fucking great.
No.
It's a fucking great book.